Hey everybody, and welcome to Hell is for Children. This show is on every Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, which is 2100 hours Central European Time. My name is Geerte Frenken, and this show is all about the topic of protective mothers and their children. So what's a protective mother? A protective mother tries to protect her child or children from their abusive fathers by many means necessary, which is an uphill battle in today's global corrupt family court system that thrives on paternal entitlements. And today's guest is child abuse survivor Byrne, who was forced into full custody of his abusive father together with his brother JP when they were only 10 and 12 years old. And through emotional and physical abuse, their father ensured that they were completely deprived from their mother. And 18 years later, they were reunited with their mother as adults. And Brendan is going to introduce his book, Don't Hug Your Mother, which he wrote together with his brother. And it's also helpful for kids who are currently in full custody by abusive fathers. And we had this show, we started this show last week, but we had some audio issues, so we're redoing it this week. So welcome, Brendan.
Thanks, Geerte. Thanks for having us. I think the sound is a lot better this week, all right? So
Yes, a whole lot better. So thanks for hanging in there with us and
yeah, no problem.
rejoining us this week.
Absolutely.
So you wrote this wonderful book. I have it over here, and I
Yeah,
see behind you too.
I did. Yeah, it's a product
Don't hug
placement.
your. And it's a memoir about how you and your brother were taken from your mom and placed with your abusive father when you were about
Yeah,
10 and 12 years old, correct?
that's correct. Yeah, and it's basically the book is about how our father turned us against our mothers and forced us into not seeing our mother for what lasted 18 years before we were adults. In which case we sought to find her again. But to probably the best part to start is really at the beginning or whatever like that. So it was around the late 80s or whatever. My father started having an affair with a younger woman or whatever. So well, she would have been 16 when he started having an affair with her. So he would have been 28. He himself and my mother subsequently separated, and there was the law was very strange in Ireland at the time. I mean, certainly women didn't have a lot of rights. Whatever rights they have now, they had even worse rights then. So in around 1989, there was a law here in Ireland, the Family House Act. It was that used to basically mean that the husband kind of owned the family home. And it seemed to be, that changed in 1989, and it seemed to be just around that time as well when they separated and my mother moved out of the house with myself and JP. My father stayed in the family home with his new mistress and our eldest brother as well, Seamus, who also stayed in the house. And he would have been 15 at the time. I was 8 and JP was 10. So we were, at the time, I was very happy with that because I wanted to stay with my mother. I didn't have a wonderful relationship with my father at the time, and I was a lot closer to my mother. So obviously I was quite pleased that I was going to live with her. I mean, obviously it wasn't ideal. Your parents are separating or anything like that, but I was like, well, this actually hasn't worked out too bad for me, to be quite honest, because so I spent a year or so living with her, and then to my to my surprise and horror, I started hearing my father and mother would regularly have arguments still at this stage where he'd be calling up, say, to collect us, and the argument seemed to stem around, from what I heard, I kept hearing maintenance payments, which I know today are like payments that he was supposed to be making to my mother, and she was struggling to pay the rent in the house that we were in because, for whatever reason, but, you can probably guess from my point of view, what I heard was arguments about maintenance payments and arguments about my mother paying the rent. So these arguments then moved on to him deciding that he wanted us back to live with him again. Um,
So he wanted to basically get out of the child support
well,
sense.
I don't want to, one of the things we did with the book was we stuck to exactly what we know as the facts. And what you can do then is you can kind of devise from that what you will. Absolutely, what you're saying sounds very likely, really, let's put it that way. But what had ended up happening anyway, the arguments continued. I was very much against living with him. Even prior to, like, while I still lived with my mother or whatever like that, like, we obviously had visits with him, and the visits were like, sometimes he wouldn't be there. A lot of the time he wouldn't be there. If he was, he'd barely acknowledge me. So, I remember even as a child, like as a 9-10-year-old boy going, this guy doesn't even, why do I have to visit him? Because he doesn't want me to be here and I don't want to be here. So why are we doing this? Like, what's the point? Sort of way. So, yeah.
Was he abusive at this point as well?
Not really, no. It was just more, at this point, it was more just, it was as if, it was barely kind of existed, in its life. I was just sort of, I was somewhere low down the list of his priorities, put it that way. That's how I felt anyway, So he wasn't abusive to me. Now, our older brother, Seamus, though, I remember like seeing things where he'd be punching him or whatever, and he'd be asking Seamus to hit him back and stuff like this, which was kind of weird.
Well, that's also a form of, if you see your sibling getting hurt, then that's also child abuse for you.
Yeah, well, it sent a message to me. I was like, Jesus, don't mess with this guy, because he's going to start doing that to me then. So, but up to that point, he hadn't. As I say, up to that point, I actually think my mother kind of protected me a lot from him. And when they'd have arguments or something, if I was there witnessing them, like my mother would try and get me out of the situation or whatever. Or if she couldn't fail in that, because he'd sometimes want us to be there for the arguments for whatever reason. After he'd leave the house then or whatever, and she'd sort of comfort me and sort of tell me not to worry about it, that it's an adult thing, and yada yada. So up to that point, I had sort of avoided that kind of physical abuse that would come later on.
He instilled the fear in you.
Yeah, so the fear was there, and even at that point, even like he'd shout at me and stuff like that. If I wasn't sort of doing things that he wanted, and even that would scare the hell out of you as a young boy. This kind of older, he's your father. He's supposed to be a kind of a person in charge of you or whatever like that. So.
He's supposed to be your role model.
Supposed to be your role model as well. Yeah, no, absolutely. Thankfully, I didn't really buy into that too much, but he, so at that point, I was very against, as I said, moving back in with him. JP had changed throughout the year that we lived with our mother, which was very strange to me at the time. Looking back on it, and even him looking back on it, we've obviously talked about it, like, up until that point as well, when we moved out, he was kind of also, kind of just an afterthought or whatever to my father. Maybe a little bit more involved with my father's plans, because he was a little bit older, whatever like that. He'd bring him sometimes to the park and stuff like that, where he'd say, you're too young or whatever like that. And he'd bring JP and James, and they'd kick a rugby ball around or whatever like that. So, to some extent, he was a little bit closer, but he was still very much, I would have thought, very much closer to our mother. And when we moved in, myself, JP, and my mother, we got a lot, on like a house on fire. Seamus used to come and visit us. He used to stay in our house nearly more times, I think, than he was supposed to be permanently in our father's house, And by all accounts, was pretty happy at that time, as things were going. But JP, somewhere along the way, after a few months or whatever like that, just started acting very strange, like it seemed strange to me, like just really small things, at first, like where he'd be like, start giving out about what my mother had cooked us for dinner. And I'd be like, oh, what's wrong with it? Like, and you never had a problem with it before. She might make a curry, say, and she'd use a jar, which, I regularly do myself now as well. And he'd start, as an 11-year-old, giving it, going, what are you doing using a jar? You should be using proper ingredients and stuff like that. That's a lazy way of doing things. And it was like, looking back now, clearly, this isn't a thing an 11-year-old child says without hearing it. And that's, when I look back, and that's one of the things that stands out, because that never made sense to me as a child. So I was like, oh. But then he started like saying things to me where he was like going, if we moved back with our father or whatever like that, would it be better or whatever? Wouldn't it be better, kind of thing? And I used to argue with JP very rarely, but anytime we did argue or whatever like that, generally he'd actually win the arguments. And maybe it was because he was a little bit older or whatever, I don't know. But he usually was able to make sense where I'd sort of say, okay, well, fair enough. But this was one where I was like, no, hang on a second. How on earth could it be any better living up there with him? Like, he's not a nice guy. Living here with our mother is great. We have, we have her. She gets us whatever we want, whatever. She looks after us, and, we enjoy our time here and all. And his argument back used to just be like, it just would be better if we moved with that. It just would be, And I was like, that's not like him to even argue like that. To just go, it just would be, to not make sense. He always, any other argument, made a point of why we would or whatever. So obviously, I didn't see it at the time, but at the time, it seems clear looking back that our father had been talking to him anyway and trying to persuade him that it was a good idea to move back with him.
And then try to get to you through him.
Exactly, and then try to get, but because he actually didn't really try on me or whatever like that, I don't know, but it just pushed me even further away from him. And, the fact that the fact that everything was happening like this or whatever like that, and I could see a change, say, in JP or whatever like that, and I knew it was down to my father, that sort of way. So I was kind of annoyed with him about that as well, so there was a lot not to like about it at the time. So anyway, there was an argument then at the front door where he was demanding that we choose who we wanted to live with, him or our mother, and it was when he came to pick us up where we were going to stay in his house that night, So I was pretty scared that, like, I know I'm going to get in the car with him now after I answer this question. So if I give him the answer he doesn't want, what's he going to do, So...
Well, outrageous question too.
Absolutely.
But with what parent do you want to live? That's...
Yeah, and I mean, it's not even here, how's it going, what parents you want to live. It's like, right, let's ask them then. And my mother was saying, no, we don't involve them. You don't have, they're too young. He said, no, it's their lives, let's ask them. And staring at us, here, who do you want to live with then, right? Who do you want to live with? And JP breaks down crying, and reluctantly as well, breaks down crying and reluctantly walks over to my father. My father's smiling like, yeah, see, I won this round kind of thing. Now, I didn't walk over to my mother, but I didn't walk over to him. And I just stood there, said, I'm just standing my ground. I was like 9 or 10 years of age or something. But I was like, there's no way I'm walking over to him because I don't want to live with him. Like, it's not even like a question of I might want to, or there's, I don't know, it's 50-50 here. I was like, I really, really don't want to live with this guy. I want to stay with my mom. That's it. Like, there's no gray area here. So he just looked at me and he, with disgust or whatever. And then he said to my mother that, the reason why the only reason why I wasn't, because I was too young to understand, and that she mollycoddled me, which is basically, she used to, treat me as a mother treats their boy, like hugs. And
so you're a mama's boy or something. You
exactly. That's what he made it out. He was, you're a mama's boy. She Molly calls it, you're weak because of it. You know what I mean? You're not a real man almost. You know what I mean? I wasn't a real man. I was 9 years old.
Right.
But, at the time, like, it does have an effect on you. And you're like, but I still didn't really care, like, what he thought of me because of the fact that I was so kind of disliked him. I was like, he can think what he likes. I don't care. I want to live with my mom. I don't care if he thinks I'm this, that, and the other, like, So, unfortunately, he decided that was a winner for him, I think. And, I don't know what goes on in the background, obviously, as it being a child or whatever like that. But before I know it, I find that, lo and behold, I'm back living with him and his mistress, who, wasn't exactly, when we first met her, she was very nice. And then met her a few more times, and then she wasn't very nice anymore. She was quite the opposite of nice, She had us doing everything in the house, from, washing to ironing to hoovering to cleaning their bedroom, making their bed, pick it up after her, picking her knickers and stuff up, and putting them in the wash. Absolutely everything. Like, they just get dressed at night time and leave their clothes in a heap on the floor, and me and JP have to clean up after them. So basically, essentially, like, they had now gotten themselves two slaves for the house.
Two little slaves. Yeah, that's what
exactly. And now they didn't. And now they didn't have to kind of pay that child maintenance to my mother anymore. So it seemed like a win-win for them. And obviously it was very much a loss for us because suddenly we're on from, if anything, our mother just picked up after us all the time or whatever like that, to now suddenly having to pick up after these two people who were horrible to us, and who not only like picking up, like what used to really annoy me was that it wasn't even that I didn't get gratitude, but I'd be told that I did everything the wrong way, So I do the hoovering. Did you do this hoovering? You did a shit job of it. You're a fucking useless, lazy bastard, blah, blah, blah. And this is at 10, 11 years of age, and you're like, and I try so hard then to do it right, to try and avoid getting this. And this is mainly from my Natalie, which was my father's mistress or whatever, they ended up getting married as well. So it was just horrible living there. And obviously it was just like we wanted to move back with our mother. But then on top of that, then I'm sort of thinking, well, maybe I will move back with our mother. And we're still seeing our mother at the first couple of months or whatever like that on visits. But very, very quickly into it, our father said to us, look, you go see your mother. It started off at the start. You go visit your mother now, okay? Go down to her. Natalie would brush her hair to the sides and do it differently to the way our mother had done it. And they bought a couple of new, and not even a lot now, just a few new outfits for us. About 3 or 4 new outfits, and we always had to wear those outfits and say, this is the way that Natalie dresses us now, or whatever like that. And to an extent, I didn't really understand all of that, and I kind of didn't mind doing it because I was like, look, whatever keeps everyone, And I don't know if it had any effect on my mother at the time. I mean, I'm sure it did looking back, but certainly at the time, I didn't feel like I was harming her in any way saying that, and I didn't feel like I didn't know why my father was asking me to do it, and I just was like, look, it's easier to just do it. But then it escalated. The first escalation was that he would say, okay, because she'd always try and give us something. When we'd visit her, she'd always try and give us something, maybe like a present or some money or whatever, and particularly around birthday times or Christmas times or whatever like that. And there was one particular time, and I think it was close to Christmas. It would have been quite close to Christmas, actually, because it was a comic book she wanted to give us. It was a Byrne annual. And they only come out around Christmas, so it was definitely coming up. So she took it out of her bag. I remember in a restaurant, she took it out of her bag and she handed it to JP, and she said, there you go, there's a present for you. And JP, acting on our father's orders, turned around and he was like, no, you're grand, they don't want it, or whatever. So my mom turned around to me and she said to him, Brendan will have it then. And I just looked at the floor and just shook my head. I was just like, I know I'm not supposed to take it, so no. And obviously I really wanted the comic book as well. I was, this like my mother knew what I liked, and that was what I liked. That's what I would have loved to have that and gone home to her house preferably, but and sat and read that and whatever. But I was under orders to say no, so I said no, and I was able to do that to an extent. But at this point, and again, I mean, it's not that I was even thinking. I remember feeling bad for my mother at the time, but I also felt annoyed at the fact that I wanted this book and I couldn't take it. I was like, why the fuck is he asking us to do it? Why is he getting it, or not asking, ordering us to do this? So then it escalated anyway. He obviously decided that he had succeeded in doing that. And he was delighted when we come home and we'd tell him the stories, and we'd be rewarded with lemonade and crisps if we, didn't take the present or whatever like that. So then it escalated into him saying that if you go down to see your mother this time now, he said, I want you to, when she goes to give you a hug, you could duck out of the hug and say you don't want to hug her, that you just don't hug her back, don't hug your mother at all. That's the title of the book. So I was, even at a 10-year-old now at this stage, I wasn't able to do that. I just couldn't do it. I was like, no. I was like, everything was kind of shit at the time of my life and everything. And I liked getting a hug from my mother. You know what I mean? Like,
it's awful. It's awful to hear your father's teaching you not to hug your mother, not to take any present.
Not just teaching. Teaching is one thing. Ordering and forcing. So, like, I mean, with this hug thing, I couldn't do it. So I went down myself, JP and Seamus went down to visit our mother. She went in to give me a hug and I gave her a hug back and everything else, and everything was grand. And then on the walk back up, Seamus started saying to me, he was like, here, listen, you're such a mammy's boy or whatever like that, you know. Dad told us you're not supposed to hug her or whatever like that, and now you have or whatever. And I was like, you know, whatever, Seamus or whatever. He's just older brother giving me a hard time, you know. Now he was talking. Obviously, Seamus would be the last person to kind of say that he was with 15 and he was under orders to make sure that we didn't hug our mother and stuff like this. So he was only.
So it was going down from your oldest brother to JP and then to you.
Exactly, yeah. Oh. The order of authority kind of thing, you know. Yeah. And that was the general feeling in the house as well, you know what I mean? Like Seamus was told, and I remember hearing our father saying to Seamus, "Now you're my right-hand guy, like they're too young to understand, but you can help me, you know, do what's right for you and what's right for all of us, you know, is basically, you know, your mother is no use for you, blah, blah, blah." And I mean, this subsequently led, in my opinion, to Seamus has a lot of psychiatric problems now, and I think it all stems from this, in my opinion. Of
course. I mean, he didn't get the chance to develop his own personality. Absolutely, he was a handler of his younger brothers, right?
Yeah, well, that, and he was also being turned against our mother as well, but at a later age of 15, where we were actually, weirdly enough or whatever, I don't know, but I kind of, it's as if we were almost young enough to adjust to it. In a strange kind of way. I mean, we never fully adjusted to it, but in a kind of, I don't know, I just tried to make sense of the fact that he has psychiatric problems, and myself and JP. I think the fact that myself and JP were close in age and we kind of had each other also helped us. But anyway, it's probably a different story. But so what happened anyway from then on from that was myself and JP went to visit our mother. And I decided that since Seamus wasn't there or whatever like that, I could hug my mother as well, because I decided that JP probably wouldn't give out. I knew he wouldn't say to me why. You know, we actually discussed it, and he was sort of saying, I don't know why our father is asking us not to hug our mother. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to him either. So I hugged our mum, and then when we went, he didn't. He said he decided to go with my father's orders. And then when we walked back up to the house or whatever, he was like, "Oh, you're not supposed to hug mom." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, but it's a stupid rule. It makes no sense." And he was like, "Yeah, you're right, Grant," or whatever. So we went back, and of course, there was always an inquest as soon as we went back. Okay, what did she say? What did you do? Did she go to hug you? Did you hug her back? And I went, "No, I didn't. No." Did she try and offer presents? No. Right. This sort of seemed to rack JP with guilt then. He watched me lying to my father and say, "You know, no, I didn't hug her." And I had. So I thought that was it, that was grand. And then within about an hour then, I hear my name being called, shouted at, down these stairs. JP's after telling me you hugged your mother. What the fuck are you like? What are you know, you're a useless little, she mollycoddled you, she's this, what kind of a person are you? How could you do that to me? How could you do that to Natalie, who's looking after you now? You're hurting her and everything. He used to try and tell me.
So it's all about guilt, and there's lies. You're forced to lie. You're forced to feel guilty about hugging your mother. I mean, it's outrageous.
Yeah. So it was, it was outrageous. Like, and I mean, just those episodes alone are enough to kind of, in my mind, to just sort of say, what a fucking asshole that guy is. But it goes on, because then he just, he manages to, because of this and because of I mean, he hit me after that or whatever as well. And that was like, okay, if I hug my mother, I'm going home to a beating. I'm like, I don't really want that. Like, so the next time I went to meet my mother, she went in to hug me, and I just looked at the ground. I stared, actually. I remember it so vividly. I had a pair of blue jeans, I remember, and there was kind of a white patch on the front. And I just focused on the patch. And I just stared at the patch, and my mother went to hug me, and I just ducked out and ducked around and stared at the patch. And my mother was like, "What's wrong?" And I was just like, "No, it's grand. I don't want to hug you. I can't hug you. And why can't you hug me? I don't want to talk about it. I just don't." And I could hear the hurt in her voice, you know, and that made me feel extremely guilty as well. Well,
did you consider saying to her, like, I'm not allowed to?
Yeah, I did. I did say to her, I'm not allowed to. You know, I did say that. And I think that's what kind of got her to go, well, okay, well, look, you know, and she my mother was kind of the type of person who wouldn't say a bad thing about anybody, including her father. Even to this day, to an extent now, but she still won't, like, we couldn't sit around now. Sometimes I'd love to sit around with her and say, listen, our father was an asshole, let's talk for 3 hours about it. She wouldn't want to do that. She doesn't want to, one rule she used to always say to me when I was younger, there's some good in everybody, I remember. And it's the one rule that she used to tell me that I don't agree with anymore, because I just don't think there's any good in my father, like, So, yeah, so, I mean, she seemed to get it together anyway, and we went to a restaurant, whatever, and we had cake and whatever. And we talked or whatever, but I could tell at the time she was hurt, but she seemed to get it together. So we went back to our house after the visit, and obviously the inquest, did you hug your mother? And I was able to honestly say, no, I didn't. And it was like, fair play to you. Yeah, you're a great kid now, you are. Fair play to you. And lemonade and crisps and what have you. And I remember just thinking, because you don't really understand it at that age, but all I could understand was, in one sense, if I do what this man tells me to do, things aren't too bad. If I don't do what this man tells me to do, things are really fucking shit. So it's kind of like, what can you do, What I did do was I started acting out, and I don't remember even doing it kind of consciously or whatever like that, but I started acting out and doing all sorts of crazy things, particularly in school. For that entire year, like, I went from being quite pretty good in school and kind of under the radar kind of student, like, just quiet, whatever, to suddenly being a complete lunatic in school, and which I was nearly suspended a few times. I tried to set the school on fire.
So you were acting out. You had to act it out somewhere.
I was kind of like, I think I was kind of like sort of saying, look, someone's going to notice this and say, listen, this guy was grand when he was his mother, and now he's not anymore, and put two and two together.
So it was kind of like an SOS.
Yeah, but it didn't really happen. I remember there was one thing, I mean, I don't even have this one in the book, because when myself and JP wrote the book, it was actually originally 190,000 words, so we had to try and cut it down into a readable amount, where it's now 100,000 words. So there's so many episodes we actually had to leave out of it, to make it actually a readable book for people.
Oh, right, part 2.
Yeah, exactly. We might have to. But because there was another episode, I remember I left the school. I convinced a friend of mine who also said he wasn't happy at home. Now, we're 10 years old or whatever like that. I'm talking to a friend, and I think he was in trouble for some reason at home or whatever like that. Probably legitimately, I don't know. So I said, here, listen, I have this idea in my head for ages now. I'm going to run away from home and kind of go live. I was like, so naive. Like, I remember thinking it was actually realistic. Like, there was a massive tree I knew in an area, and I was like, if we could probably like build some sort of a tree house up there and stuff and live in it and all. Like, just naive. And I remember I was like, all I need is like £1, which is like, say, the equivalent to €1. And if I have, like, there's sweets for 10 cents, and they could last me like for a day, and then that could keep me going for 10 days. And so I thought I'd convince this guy to run away from home with me or whatever, and I went with him towards his house, but it was also the opposite way to my house, and kind of up, and I was like, okay, now we have to turn right to go up to this tree. And he turned around and he was like, oh, I was only messing, man. I'm not running away. Why the fuck would I run away, like, from home? Like, and I was like, oh shit, because I wasn't, like, I don't want to do it on my own. He was like, oh dude, I'm going home, like, things aren't that bad. And I was like, oh shit, they are for me. But I thought about it, and I was like, well, if I go, I did think about it, seriously considered it. And I was like, what will happen is I'll be found. Someone will say, good God, your father will be so worried about you. Bring me back to my father. And I had it in my head, I remember. I said, they'll bring me back to my father. And my father will stand at the door and say, oh my God, thanks for getting my son back. You're so great. We were so worried or whatever. And then whoever it was that brought me back would go, and the door would close, and then he'd tear fucking strips out of me for fucking putting him under the spotlight, for fucking going against what et cetera, et cetera. So in the end, I was too scared to run away from home, not because I was scared what would happen to me when I ran away from home. I was too scared of being caught, being brought back to him, and having to face the consequences of what he would do to me for running away from home. So I didn't in the end. So I went home and just try to endure it, like. And then it was after that, then I kind of sort of said, I would like give up altogether then at that stage. And
yeah, there has to come a point where you have to almost, you're forced to accept the situation that you're in, even though you're extremely unhappy and you want to get away, but what can you do, right?
yeah, well, I mean, after that I started doing, I found these tablets, Bicidol tablets that were actually or indigestion tablets, but I didn't know what they were. And I just thought they're some sort of medication. So I started eating loads of them and spraying Natalie's perfume stuff in my mouth and all, trying to drink perfume and stuff like that, trying to see would I just pass out and die. I just wanted to, because it was just that bad. And I ended up then trying to slit my wrists and stuff in the kitchen and trying to clean up after. It was blood dripping. I'm trying to clean up the kitchen after it at like 11 years of age, because I was like, again, even worried at that point that I'd make a mess of the kitchen while I'm trying to do this. So
that was your worry.
That was my worry.
While you're slashing your wrist.
Yeah, and I was like looking at my wrist, are bleeding and stuff, and I'm like going, why am I fucking dead already? And what I was doing, I was actually slitting across. And I know now, not that I would ever plan it ever to, but you know, you're supposed to obviously go a different way. And thankfully I didn't know it at the time. So I was unsuccessful. And then because I was unsuccessful, I thought that this was some sort of miracle and that God had wanted me to stay alive for some reason. So I turned to last refuge when you're really fucked. I was like, right, God, help me out here. And every day I'd come home from school, and at this stage, JP was in secondary school, so he was in school later. And both my father and Natalie worked. So I'd come home, and after doing all the housework, cleaning all the rooms and their bedroom and the bathroom and all that kind of jazz, then I would spend a good hour on my knees praying to God, openly talking to God, asking for help and do something for me. And I'd make bargains with him. I'd say, if you do something for me, I'll stop trying to kill myself. You know, that seems like a deal, God. You know what I mean? Help me out here. Then, I don't know, things just, you kind of, as you said, you just come to a point where you just sort of accept it. I'm like, oh, well, I've tried everything and nothing's worked. By this stage then, what had happened with our mum throughout that kind of period was we went from the visits to don't hug her to suddenly we had this huge big uproar where we went to the cinema with her and we went for tea and cake afterwards, and we were in immense trouble, absolutely the worst trouble probably JP has ever been in his life with her father, for staying out with our mother to have tea and cake after the cinema. Yeah, and I mean, this was intense. We were sent down to our mother sort of as punishment, but we didn't see it as punishment, to stay with her in a neighbouring county where her relatives lived. And we went down, and it was the best weekend because I was with my mother for the whole weekend. We were supposed to stay on a Sunday night, and JP kept, the whole weekend, he kept on trying to find payphones to ring our father and say that he was sorry and all this sort of shit. And I was just like, JP, cock the fuck on like this. Don't be ringing him. Just enjoy what we have here, you know. And on the Sunday, he rang our father. And our father said, do you want me to come down and pick you up? And JP, I remember I was standing beside JP. I was like, I said, hey, he shouldn't have rang him. I was like, don't ring him. Tonight's going to be great. We're sitting in. We had videos that we were going to watch with our mom and our auntie and sweets. And, you know, and it was just going to be great. We were going to sleep the night there. And I was like, this is going to be a great day. And JP rings. And, of course, he's like, do you want me to come down and pick you up? And JP's like, no, we're grand. What do you mean, no? Do you want us to come down and pick you up? And JP, of course, the guilt. Okay. So with that, you know, he hangs up the phone. He's kind of looks at me with a sad face. He's sorry, like they're coming to pick us up. And I was like, you fucking asshole. I was so angry with him at the time because I was like, you just ruined what's going to be an amazing night. And now we have to go back with these guys. So that's what happened. They picked us up, and I didn't know at the time. I was really disappointed with everything. So I spent the last 2 hours while we waited on them to drive to pick us up, moping kind of, and almost fighting with my mom, because I was like, can you not ring him back and say, no, you're not coming up to pick me up or whatever? And she was like, oh, it just doesn't work like that. And I was just like, oh, you know, what's the story? So I was kind of just moping with her. I was talking to my auntie more at this stage for those 2 hours, and I didn't realise at the time that that was the last time I'd actually see her now for 18 years.
Because I can imagine when I'm listening to you that there must have been a feeling of frustration that your mother couldn't help you, and that you probably felt angry at her for not being able to rescue you from that situation, right?
In my mind, you know, there was only one person in the world that I thought could help me here, and that was my mother. And if she wasn't helping me, I was like, well, why not? Like, you know, you told me when we were younger you'd protect me, and you know what I mean? You told me not to worry about these things when there was arguments and all that. And now it's all gone up, you know, shit creek, and I'm stuck living with him, and you're not doing anything about it. What's that about? Like, and of course she was probably doing everything behind the scenes to try and, you know, stop this happening. And she was more. I remember when we moved out of her house, I mean, she was broken, like, you know what I mean, like crying her eyes out and everything else. But
what could she have done, right? I mean,
well, looking back, what could she have done? I mean, I look back now and I say she had no money. She was completely dependent on him before the separation. She was a housewife, you know, which was in Ireland in the 80s. It was promoted to be a housewife, you know. Women, as I said earlier, they didn't have many rights. Like, so much so, I mean, JP was only telling me the other day that in the 80s, obviously Ireland and England are beside each other. If a husband moved over to England from Ireland, even if the wife stayed in Ireland, she became domiciled in England. Thus was the kind of rights of a woman in Ireland in the 80s. Like, you know, it boggles the mind. Like, so anyway, as a housewife or whatever, she was completely dependent, as I say. When they separated, he hired his own private solicitors with the money that he had, and she was forced to get what is known in Ireland, or at the time was known in Ireland, as free legal aid, which is it's better than obviously what happens in the States at the moment, where I think you don't get any attorney, but at least you were given some sort of attorney. But it's a state aid. It's let's just say if you're going to be trying to be a successful solicitor, you're probably not going to go work for the legal aid people. Like, you know, if you're trying to, if you're very ambitious, if that makes sense. You know,
so the moms all get the shitty attorneys, basically.
Exactly. I mean, it's you know, if it's like anything, you get for what you pay for, and if you're paying nothing for it, I mean, I'm sure this guy, I mean, I remember him, McNulty, her solicitor, I'm sure he probably tried his best or whatever, but he obviously wasn't very good. And you know, things have happened since then that have led me to just be kind of, because he's still around now, and I'm like, what was he doing? Like, how did he agree? How did he allow that to happen? Now, it's, you know, I don't know. It's hard for me to know, as I say, what went on behind the scenes. So it's hard for me to make a judgment call on what went on. But you can make your own mind up based on what has happened. I mean, you have a man goes and has an affair with a 16-year-old. He's 28, has an affair with a 16-year-old and moves her into the house, and the mother and the kids are out of the family house. Like, you know, none of that makes sense already, you know, so it's just, you know, but that's how it happened. So as I say, at the time I didn't really understand any of that or why that happened. But yeah, our mother tried to call us a few times after that trip, and at first, like, we'd have phone calls and we'd know that you could hear the other phone upstairs say clicking, you know, and there was kind of an extra echo where your call was being listened to, you know. And then that obviously they didn't like that anymore. So one of the days, JP had actually been on the phone to her mother, and she started crying and he was crying or whatever, and our father came in, having listened to the call, we're pretty sure, because he heard the whole echo and the whole lot. Came in, who was that on the phone? It was our mother. You don't need to be talking to her. What does she want, whatever? She said she misses us. She sounds sad. That's what JP said to her father. And her father, she's not sad. She doesn't love you. He always remembers, he says, crocodile tears. That's what they are. Like, she's faking tears or whatever like that. She doesn't love you. She doesn't care for you. She's abandoned you. And that's what kept on being told to us then, because we couldn't see her, and we didn't see her I mean, I remember Natalie even turning around. She's like, if yous were my biological children, so to speak, whatever, and I was in that position, I'd be camped outside that door, banging on the door before it. And I was like going, yeah, why isn't my mother doing that, whatever like that? You know, looking back, you're like, well, you can't really actually do that because the police will come and pull you away, probably. You know, but. Yeah, so it was just constant then from then on in. But I mean, our father and Natalie then were completely in control. Our mother didn't get a look in. In order to survive, I would say, under this regime that I was now under, was the best thing to do was to, after a while, was to kind of pretend like I agreed that my mother had abandoned me and I agreed that she didn't love me.
That's awful.
At the start, I didn't go along with it, and I was like, "Why aren't you?" Whatever. So, it was all a very short period of time as well. Like, nearly we'd moved in within a couple of months. We were all contact was gone from her. And my father and Natalie then got married over in Florida, Puerto Rico, somewhere, because they couldn't marry in Ireland because they were separated. Divorce wasn't in Ireland at the time. So they got some foreign marriage, and when they came back, basically when they were away or whatever, I got a postcard from them. I was staying in an uncle's house. I got a postcard from them, and it was signed. It was very oddly written. It was written, Natalie had wrote the kind of postcard part. We're on holidays or whatever. We're sitting by the sun or whatever. And I was like, I don't give a shit. Like, why am I getting a postcard in the first place? This was really not like them to send me a postcard. As if they thought of me, like, you know, sort of way. But then it's noticed that my father had signed it off, where Natalie obviously hadn't signed it off for whatever reason, and my father had signed. Dad, I'll tell you about it when we get home. Dad, Mum, XXX or something like that. And I remember looking at it, and I was like 11. I was like, Mum, who the fuck is Mum? I was like, going, it's not Ma'am. Who was my mother, who we called Ma'am. Who the fuck is Mum? So they get back from holidays and they had some presents and stuff for us. I was kind of like, maybe they're not so bad. Like, you know what I mean? We got the presents, and we were. I remember we were out on our green and stuff. Like, we're kind of happy with what they brought us back. It seemed like, now it was all just tacky crap, like, to be honest with you. But just getting anything from them was kind of like, hey, you know, maybe they did think about it. And they sent me a postcard and all that. Within a couple of days, then our father said to us, you know, listen, you know, Natalie's really good to you. She's very fond of you and everything. I think you should start calling her Mum, as in your mother. And I was like, I can't do that. Like, I just can't. You know, it's not even I'm trying to be bad, like, or like, or go against it or rebel. I just can't physically can't call her Mum. She's Natalie. Yeah. That's all I can call it.
It's completely unnatural.
Absolutely, it's completely unnatural. So we didn't. That's, you know, we kind of, okay, and then we didn't. And then it went from that to, why the fuck aren't you just calling her Mum? Yeah. And we were like, well, it's kind of awkward. Well, look, you're upsetting her every time you don't. She really wants you to call her Mum. And I got the distinct impression she didn't give a flying fuck about what we called her. You know what I mean? This seemed to be all his kind of thing.
This guilt trip constantly.
Yeah. So the guilt eventually worked on JP, and he started calling her Mum. I just couldn't. Even if I wanted to, though, even if the guilt trip had forced me into it, I couldn't. So when my father was around, like, to avoid calling her Mum, but I knew I couldn't call her Natalie, because he'd go, why the fuck you call her Natalie? So I just say, like, I'd just go up to her and tap her on the shoulder. We'd be in the same room, tap her on the shoulder, and then I ask her a question or whatever. Or else I'd just go, like that for ages until
try to avoid it. Yeah.
I tried anything to avoid it, because I just couldn't do it. It wasn't even that I was trying to rebel against him. I just couldn't do it. So one day then I was, he asked me to ask, and it's this all, looking back on this whole, everything seemed so planned by my father, in that even this episode seemed planned. I remember my father said to me in the kitchen, he was like, go and ask Natalie something or other. She's upstairs. And I could hear her with the hairdryer upstairs. So I stood up on the stairs, and my father was in the kitchen, and I felt he was out of my earshot, that I could just kind of shout up. So, Natalie, Dad wants to know, blah, 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 whatever like that. And when I shouted Natalie first, the hairdryer was going, she couldn't hear me, so I had to shout it a bit louder. And Natalie, and then next of all, I see him storming out into the hall. He grabs me, he drags me into the dining room, twists my arm around, up against the wall. What the fuck? I told you, you have to call her mum. And that's when I went, look, I just can't. He goes, you fucking will. You will call her mum. And he, in my face, blah, blah, blah. Gave me a thump across, and I was just like, okay. Crying, obviously, went back into the hallway, and he stood there watching, big, angry, red face on him. So, and I went, Mum. And she answered in a real fake kind of, yes. And I went, Dad wants to know, blah, blah, blah. Oh, okay, there's the thing. And then he just turned around, no, isn't that fucking easier? And I was just like, yeah, well, not really. But so from that point on, then I called her mum as well. It was still hard at that time, but I was like, I'm not getting another belt off him, So I didn't. There was other weird things that happened, like years before that, we had found out that Santa Claus hadn't existed, and we had a few Christmases where Santa Claus didn't exist, where we were aware that this is when my mum and dad were still together. And we were aware that the presents had come. It was actually Seamus that showed us bikes that we had gotten we thought were from Santa, and he showed us them before Christmas. And we were like, because I believed in Santa up until then. JP was on the fence, and I was like, fuck, okay, there is no. But at the time, I turned around and I was like, actually quite grateful to my father, because I was like, well, that actually means that my father got these from me in a way. I was like, okay, maybe he's not such a good guy. Now, this is when I was 5 or 6, or not such a bad guy. This is when I was 5 or 6. He's after getting us these bikes. And himself and my mother, I remember, brought us to the park and taught me how to ride the bike. I was like, this is one of the things where I was kind of, that's why I remembered it so well. And then the next Christmas, I was like, thanks, Dad, you're going to get me a present and all. I realised Santa isn't going to around. And it was grand. Just went on for a couple of years. So now we're 11 or something. I'm 11 and JP is 13. Or 10 and 12 maybe, actually. We're still 10 and 12. I'm trying to think of the year. It was 1991, so I'm 10 and JP is 12. And next of all, our father's like, are you going to write your letter to Santa? I was like, what the fuck is he on about? Like, Santa was gone ages ago. And he was like, now you have to write your letter to Santa. Myself and Natalie are very excited about this whole Santa thing. Natalie's going to bring you to see Santa. And our mother used to always bring us to see Santa. Even after we didn't believe, she used to bring us just for the crack, even though we knew and we would say it. So Natalie was going to bring us to see Santa. And we were supposed to pretend that we thought Santa existed. And I was like, this is just insane. But
it's getting weirder and weirder.
Yeah. But I kind of went along with it. Like, I mean, obviously it made no sense to me as a kid, and it made no sense to me up until when I was really writing the book, and I look back on it, and I'm like, a few months after this, obviously, what I didn't know at the time, but there's a separation case coming up. So in the following summer, there's meant to be this separation case, in which case he wanted myself and JP to kind of be there at the separation case and to be seen to be living a great life for himself and Natalie. And do you know what I mean? So all of this probably fed into that, and Natalie brought them to see Santa, and Santa brought them this and all that, because I just couldn't make any more sense of it. So this is, when I was writing the book, I was like, well, that's obviously because I was like, why else would he do all this crazy shit? And the reason why I remember it so well as well is because I was like, I don't believe in Santa. I've known for years that Santa doesn't exist. And then he bought this home computer, an Amiga 500 home computer or whatever like that, and he put it in, there was a spare room, and he put it in the spare room and locked the door, right? So I'm, as I said before, I come home from school and nobody else is in the house for a few hours because JP is in secondary school and they're at work or whatever like that. And I'm like, suddenly there's a room with the door locked. And I'm like, what's in the room? So I look in the keyhole, and through the keyhole I can see this computer all set up on a desk. And I was like, all right, that must be for Christmas. I was laughing. I was like, Santa's going to fucking bring us that computer. That's great. So I was talking to a friend of mine who lived next door, and I was like, oh, so this computer now or whatever. We're obviously getting it for Christmas or whatever. It's locked in the room or whatever. And between the two of us, we realized that, you can actually just get keys. All keys of doors work. So he had a big box of keys in his house. So we tried a few of these keys. So we did. So we got in. And it was all set up, joystick, the game's ready to play or whatever like that. So after school then for a while, myself and a couple of my neighbours, I'd have half the road in and we'd all be playing this computer. This for this last for a couple of months. And then I even said to JP, even though I was really afraid, because JP used to kind of always get found out about things through these inquisitions. He used to be guilted in. I got him involved as well. And he was playing as well. We were all delighted when we were playing away. Then Christmas came, and that morning or whatever, the computer was unveiled, and we were like going, oh, wow, Santa's deadly. If you ever played the Santa, that's great. And we were playing a game. I always remember it was a James Bond game we were playing, and myself and JP were really fucking good at it. And our father was like trying to play it then. He was like a spoiled child. He was like, oh, my go again, because he was shit at it. And he was like, in his mind, he was like, I've had this for the last 2 months. They're only starting playing it, and they're better than me. How the hell would that work? But so Christmas came and went anyway. And after Christmas, pretty much 2 or 3 days after Christmas, it was like, okay, so he's got that computer, remember? Now it's getting locked back in that room, even though it was supposed to be a present for us or whatever like that. And he was using it for, I think, for work stuff and everything else. Like, it was down as a present for us, and we were quite happy because we were playing games on it and stuff. But it was locked back in this room, and we were told, okay, when you are good, when you do as a reward, you'll be able to go in for half an hour and play it, or an hour or whatever. But of course, I still had the key, so I was like, yeah, that's grand. And they used to frequent the pub quite a lot, like. So they'd head off like often on Saturday or Sunday, like they could head off at 12 o'clock in the day and not come back till that night, So I just opened the door and go in and play the computer and bring everyone in and everything else, and it was great. But Natalie used to always, she was always looking for things to kind of give out about if it wasn't that the household chores weren't done or whatever. She was always searching my room, and I had the key hidden in my room. So she found the key. So when she found the key, they had a quick inquisition with JP, and it was discovered that, yeah, we had the key and we knew about the computer. We never believed in Santa or whatever. And my father's reaction to that, and that's what makes me remember the whole episode, is because his reaction to that was just so angry and full of vitriol, because he'd obviously put a lot of planning into this for this to whole work. And I remember, and I just, because at this stage I was kind of a bit all over the place, I said back to him, like, I was like, I never wanted to believe in Santa. I told you I didn't believe in Santa, but you wouldn't fucking listen. But he took off his belt and he knocked the living shit out of me that time. So much so that he had enrolled, or he had put us in a rugby club, like, and the following week, like, I still had kind of bruises all over me, where he used to have to go into the changing room, obviously, to get changed for rugby. He made me change in the car, and he was like, because if the people see that, whatever, you'll be put in the home, And I was like, going, Jesus, I might try and get people to see this, because I want to be put in the home, because I think it would be much better than living here, like. But I didn't in the end, but that was it, like. So after that
shows your desperation. If you rather live in a home or foster care or whatever, then
well, anything seemed better than there, like, I mean, absolutely. And I mean, they constantly, that was a thing, they constantly, particularly Natalie, she'd be like, you think you have it bad here, you could have it so much worse, like. And I remember I'd be like, going, I don't know, I think it would be much better.
How can it be worse?
Yeah, how can it be worse, kind of thing, like. But she was always trying to reinforce that, and I think that was part of kind of the whole job, like, if I say it enough times, you'll start believing it. But I never truly believed that. So so at that point, so within the space of that there, a year and a couple of months, we went from living with our mom quite happily to suddenly living with our father and his mistress, and calling her mum, and doing everything, like, I mean, everything in the house for them. Ironing her, like, she was a nurse, and you'd have to iron her nurse's uniform on her slip that she had underneath it, and the whole lot, like, she'd come running, like, she'd come like a regular Monday morning, where the fuck is my slip? Why is my slip ironed and shit like this? You'd be like, oh shit, panic, running around trying to find it. It was all our fault, I'm gonna be late for work because you don't have my fucking gear ironed, you little shit, useless, lazy bastard, and it was like,
awful.
Yeah, you're 11, and this is your responsibility, like, 10 even, and it was,
let me ask you a question. During all this time, did you ever consider writing your mom a letter?
No, at this time, I mean, I didn't know what my mom's address was now at this point. My mom also started to travel, where she went to the Middle East, where I think she had reached the I need to find God's thing. So she went to Jerusalem and all these places. And she would send postcards from these places saying that she was well and
So you got the postcards? Because my daughter's not getting any mail from me.
We got the postcards, but the postcards, we were under strict instructions when the postcards came to put them on the table all the posts we had to put, categorized into his and hers, and the postcards were to be there as well. And he was going to keep all the postcards, whatever. But we did get them, and I used to read them, and he would say, look, postcard, look, she's in, Jerusalem or wherever. Like, she abandoned you.
She doesn't care about you.
She doesn't care about you. She's off traveling around on holidays. Like,
right.
She doesn't give a shit about you because she abandoned you. And I'd be like looking, kind of going, and she'd say, my mum would be like, I love you and I miss you and everything. And I'd be like, oh, why are you saying that if you're off in fucking Jerusalem? Maybe he's right. Like, so one of the postcards came in, I remember, and I said I had enough of this, so I tore it up and I shooed it in the bin. And he found out about that. And I was expecting to be in trouble because obviously it did exactly as you were told, and we were told to put the postcards in place on the table for filing. And when he found out about it, though, he was absolutely delighted because he's seen this.
He wants you to be angry, of course.
Said, why did you throw that? He said, why did you tear it up and throw it in? And I said, because I'm fucking sick of reading about her holidays and after her abandoning me. And he was like, you know what, you're a great kid now. And I was his favourite for like a good 2 or 3 days then. Even Natalie wasn't allowed to really give out to me for those days. Like, you know what I mean? It was interesting. So I knew then from then on to do that, because it kept happening. But I never really bought into it. That was the thing, that sort of way. So,
well, that's interesting. Like, somewhere in all of this, you were able to keep connected to your heart and to your true self in all of it.
He was such an asshole, though. That was the thing. If he had been a lot nicer, or even a bit nicer, I think it would have worked, because I would have been, well, he's a nice guy. But I was like going, if anyone else was telling me this, I'd believe it and it'd all add up. But at the end of the day, I was always suspicious of him because he was such a fucking asshole. So that's why it never worked, because I was just like, and I had to kind of hide so many other things from him, because I knew, like, if he believed something was black and you said, no, I think it's grey, it would be a fierce argument. And the best thing to do was to just fucking agree with him, because otherwise he'd cut you off or something, So I knew with everything, I was always kind of humouring him, you know what I mean? Like, if he said, hey, isn't your man there wearing a stupid jacket? And I go, yeah, that's a stupid jacket. Even if I thought it was the best jacket I've ever seen, because it was easier to do that. So I was always doing that. So, this was just another kind of thing where I was like, okay, well, I'll just go along with this one as well.
In the end, you're just playing a game all day long. Yeah, you're just putting up a facade to just keep the terror and the horror at bay.
To just survive and just get, and I'm like, obviously aware that at this stage, Seamus basically, when Seamus was a month shy of 18, he was kicked out by my father and Natalie because he kept on, well, I mean, there could be a million reasons why he was kicked out or whatever, but basically, in my memories, himself and Natalie kept on arguing. Now, like, when he was, I think she was 22 or 23 when she moved in, and he was 15. So there's a close age difference there even, you know what I mean? Like, and then I think he was even asked to call her mum as well. Like, and he's like, what the fuck, this woman who's 7 years older than me, like.
It's bizarre.
Yeah, she's not biologically able to be my mother, let alone fucking anything else. Like, and he was quite close to her mother as well. So,
also bizarre, right? I mean, they could have been boyfriend, girlfriend more than.
I know, and that was the thing. And, like, how teenagers think at 15 or whatever like that. I mean, perhaps things like that were going through his head. I mean, it must have been very fucking confusing. Like, she was, she was the kind of, she was like, it would have been deemed to be quite kind of glamorous. She was always makeup on and fucking all this sort of shit, So, I mean, she'd spend an hour and a half or something before to go out putting on makeup and dressing herself up. And probably a lot of women do that or whatever. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but what I'm saying is she was someone who really took after her appearance, and she was 7 years older than him. So, yeah, I mean, I would imagine there probably was weird thoughts going through his head that would confuse and conflict him, like, But because he had moved out, or because he'd been kicked out at 17, he ended up, he was kicked out, then he had breakdowns and stuff. He moved back in for a bit, and then he was gone again. I think he left himself this time. I'm not really too sure, but basically, I kind of was like, well, once I hit kind of 18, I can get the hell out of here as well. So I just have to keep up this facade until then. And because Seamus had his psychological problems, I was like, and I just have to try and not have psychological problems as well. So that was kind of where I was at about 13, 14. You know, I was like, just live until
So you were just
then.
counting down, kind of?
Counting down the days, yeah. Now the thing was, it's again, you know, interesting, as I say, the way my father seemed to be meticulously planning everything was because once I kind of got to about 15, 16, now that's only a couple of years in our lifetime now that we're older or whatever like that. But when you're 10 until that age, basically that was a long time. Like that felt like a lifetime to me, you know, even looking back at it or whatever like that was a long time. But once I hit about 15 or whatever like that, he started being a bit nicer to me, you know, a bit more. He'd spend even a little bit of time talking to me or whatever like that. He was kind of a charismatic kind of guy in a way. I mean, he got away with so much shit, with you know, that he had to have some sort of charisma about him or whatever like that. And I remember kind of thinking, well, maybe he's all right now. Maybe he's not the worst or whatever like that. And every year that I got a bit older, towards 18, the nicer he was to me. And by the time I was 18, I was like, going, you know what? He's not as bad as I kind of used to think. And maybe, like, I didn't know anything about I didn't know that this was kind of a thing that happened to other mothers or other families. And I was like, maybe something my mother did to him that he's not telling us, that he's keeping it from us for our own good. Because he seems kind of all right now. And
maybe something was wrong with her.
Maybe something was wrong with her, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why he did it. And maybe like he was just so frustrated because I wasn't getting the point when I was younger that he started, you know, the physical abuse, whatever, was just frustration, and that was, you know, partly my fault for not copping on that, you know, because he was trying to keep this secret that my mother had secretly done all these bad things to him that he wasn't telling me. Like, I mean, I'm just making up excuses myself for him at 18. Plus the fact
you're trying to make your brain and your mind is trying to make sense of it because it's so extreme.
There's that as well, exactly. Now, my own situation as well was when I was 18, then I had my own son as well. And I was very dependent then on having somewhere to live, obviously, so that I could somewhere where I could bring my own son as well.
So you got to be a father real young, at a really young age.
Yeah,
wow.
At 18, yeah. So what it meant was, you know, if I had it, if I didn't have a son, you'd move in anywhere or whatever like that. But when you have a baby, I'm like, I couldn't even, you say you go to college, I couldn't go to student digs or something like that where they're having parties every night. You know, I had to either find my own place, which is, property is very expensive in Dublin and Ireland, to rent and to buy. And it pretty much always has been, but it's at the time it was anyway. So I was 18 and I was kind of trying to go to college and stuff like this. So I was working part-time. So I was like, oh, look, it made sense for me as well as anything to kind of just humor this guy and get on with him, because then I got to stay in the house and I could bring my son up to that house and everything else, and everyone was happy. So I stayed with him a couple more years. And JP stayed a couple more years, but then he moved out. And when he moved out, I think he kind of saw a light. He started to get his sort of that independent thoughts. Because even at 19, 20, when I was still living with them, you're still hearing their skewed perspective on everything. You know, sort of way, you're still not...
It's probably surprising to the viewers and to me too that you didn't try to get out as soon as you turned 18. Yeah. So explain that to us.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I say, there's
you had your son.
Yeah, there's the dependency thing, first of all. There's also, as I say, him gradually being nicer as I moved closer to 18. As well
what do you think that was about?
I think he realised when we got to 18, we'd sort of turn around and say, oh, well, hang on, what the fuck was this all about, or whatever like that. Whereas if he was kind of nice to us and had us on side, so to speak, or whatever like that, we were obviously less likely to delve too far into it with him anyway, you know, the sort of way. Because when we did, what ended up happening like a couple of years after that, then when we did ask questions about her, man, he'd be like, you know, oh, no, she's grand, don't worry about her, or whatever, like, oh, you know, and then he'd start then trying to remember things, he'd say to us, like, do you remember how I rescued you from when you were down in Wexford with her on that weekend that just hated being there? And I rang and I said, you want to come down and pick you up? And you were like delighted. Oh, no, not even he rang. He said, and you rang me begging to bring us home. And me and JP were like, that's not what fucking happened. Like, but he was obviously building up so that he could sort of say it. And even when he said it to us at the time, like, we didn't turn around and go, what the fuck are you on about? Like, you know, we were kind of like, because we're supposed to be mates with this guy kind of at the moment, but this is kind of weird. It took for myself and JP to really talk to each other then, where we kind of went, listen, there's a lot of stuff. He's trying to remember the past in a different way. And we still didn't even at this stage realize why or what, you know, what the whole thing was. Even in our early 20s, we were just like, you know, just, you know, that's wrong. And why is he doing that? You know, even if he hadn't have made up the past, if he hadn't tried to change our memories of the past or whatever like that, so why is he doing that? Now, as it turned out, there was a divorce came into Ireland after a while or whatever, and there was a divorce case between my mother and my father was coming up at that stage when we were in our early 20s. And so...
But they weren't divorced yet?
No,
they couldn't get divorced.
Been separated for years. They could have got kind of divorced probably by about the year 2000, or... Yeah, I can't remember the exact years. But yeah, they weren't. They probably could have got divorced a little bit sooner than that. But anyway, it's neither here nor there. So basically, yeah, when the divorce, when we found out the divorce case was happening, you know, he called us in and a family meeting, so to speak. So, you know, I want you to testify against your mother, you know, say that she was a bad mother and all this sort of stuff. And that's when it became clear to us why he was trying to make us remember things, because he wanted us to go in court and say, we were down with her this one weekend and we hated being with her so much that we rang him to come down and collect us. That would have been ideal for him. So when we turned around, we were like, actually, I don't really believe this, you know, so much. When the court case did happen, like, we went to the court with him, and his barrister even was like, saying, you know, the amount of money you're offering to settle this basically is paltry or whatever, and shouldn't happen or whatever like that. And he kept on saying, the kids are they're here, they're gonna testify against her. Believe me, I don't need to give her any more money or whatever like that. They're here to testify. And myself and JP, we still didn't really talk about it to each other at the time, but we were both really, really, really uneasy with this whole thing.
It's awful.
Sorry?
Yeah, my microphone's
out. Okay, yeah, no worries.
It's okay.
So at that point or whatever like that,
so you were asked to testify against your mom at this point?
Yeah, at that point we were asked to testify against her. And that was basically the breaking point. We didn't have to testify, thankfully. And I remember thinking, if I go up on the in the dock or whatever it's called and place my hand on the Bible, again, you know, I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm not going to be able to tell his lies. And then he's going to be really fucking angry with me again, you know. And I was just like, this is a shit situation. So it turned out we didn't have to. And I was like, oh, well, that's great. We didn't have to. And my father was delighted because he had won this victory where he didn't have to give her mother any money. So I remember just looking at him just after it, and I was just like, it just all clicked then. It just all made sense. I was just like, this guy's a fucking asshole. He's just so mean. And, you know, I was just like, this guy's just wrong or whatever. And he was trying to get us to stay around for celebratory drinks and all. And myself and JP left separately though. You know, I went back to my girlfriend at the time's house, and he went to his, I think. And we were both just, you know, I remember just feeling, I just felt sick. I was just like, to have been part of that. And I was like, I wish I could reverse now a couple of days and go and say to him, here, listen, you know, the divorce case coming up, I'm going to, if I get asked to stand up in there, I'm going to say you're a fucking asshole. That's what I'm going to fucking say. I'm going to say that this happened. I'm going to tell them exactly the truth. And I hope that they, you know what I mean? But you can't turn back the time, unfortunately. So that's the way it goes.
But you feel really violated because you realize
I felt so used.
Yeah.
So used. I mean, I was just like, he just used us so that he wouldn't have
and
to
for years in a row to build up to that point.
Exactly,
I mean, it's just so planned, you know. I mean, what
so
kind of
planned,
monster
absolutely.
is doing that?
To
Yeah,
their own child, like, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, how can you do that? Like,
yeah.
and that kind of brings us on to a point, as you say, how can you do that? Is the type of person that does that. That's what's so hard for people to understand, for normal people to understand. That's what's so hard for us to understand when we were kids growing up, even up until that point, because it was only at that point that I realized that what my mom had said years ago about there's some good in some people, it was at that point that I realized, hang on, there's no good in this guy. And I was like, and he has no conscience whatsoever. Like, he is so unscrupulous that he will do anything to anyone to get his way. His kids, is like, even today or whatever, I mean, Natalie says his wife or whatever like that, if something happens or whatever like that, he will fuck her over to get his way. I know that for a fact. He will do anything to anybody just to get what he wants, to win his game, because he thinks everything's a game. And that's what I realized then. And that's what's so hard, I think, for all of us to realize, is because we all have consciousness. So we all kind of go, well, a person can't think like that. A person can't, you know, and you always have doubts. And it's like, no matter how bad that person is, they can't be. But I think if you put it in a simple terms of, like, you see the memes that go around on Facebook and Twitter, and I'm guilty of posting them myself. And you go, you have one like, doing this to your kid, or whatever, stopping one parent from seeing the kid is child abuse, and you should be ashamed, and all this. And we post them up in the whole lot. And one of them, I was just posting, I was like, what is the fucking point of this posting? They don't care if it's child abuse that they're committing.
No, they don't
They
care.
don't care. They don't feel ashamed. They don't get shamed. They don't get guilty. They don't get anything. They just keep on living life happy as fucking. How do they sleep at night? I don't know, but they do. So they're a different breed of people.
There are a different breed of people, and when you scan their brain with an MRI, it shows that the center of empathy that we have in our brain that lights up when we feel for someone else, they don't have that.
They don't have that.
They don't have
Exactly.
any electrical activity in there.
Yeah. Well, there you go. I mean, I didn't know that, but that, you know, pretty much pins it down. And I just think that's an important point when you're dealing with these people, is to realize that, because when you're dealing with,
you can't reach them. That's the point. The thing, you can't communicate with them.
People say to me, they say, well, what the book or whatever like that, you know, this is going to shame your father or whatever like that, and he's going to be so angry. He's not going to give a fuck. The only thing he's going to worry about is, can the book reopen the divorce case with her mom? And will he end up losing money over it?
Yeah, it's about money. Yeah, it's about money and power. Money and power. Yeah.
He couldn't give a shit. If he walks out and his next door neighbour turns around and go, you're a child abusive prick, he'll be like, I couldn't give a fuck. And he'll get into his BMW or his Jeep and he'll fucking drive. He doesn't care. And that is the thing. So I just think, like, from a point of view of other mothers or whatever who are dealing with these people, you'll occasionally think, oh, well, he'll give me a bit of leeway here because he'll have his conscience or whatever. You always have to remember that he has no conscience, no scruples whatsoever. So, you know, he's liable to do anything to your kid or to you, or, you know, just to get his way, to get what he wants. You know, and obviously it can be a woman as well, I suppose, as well. It's that narcissistic thing or whatever. It doesn't run just throughout men or whatever. So I suppose it's the other way.
So where you are at now, do you have any contact with him still, or?
Well, when we published the book, we decided to bring up a copy for himself, and it was interesting because we were, you know, we hadn't had any contact with him for a while. He had ended contact in the end. Like, I don't want to go through the whole thing because we'd be here all night basically. But in the end, what ended up happening was, once we started kicking against the whole, hang on, what's the story? The way you treated us and our mother was bad and everything else. He was like, right, fuck this, I'm done with this. So he sent a text message to me saying, he had a phone call with JP, where JP, he said something about Natalie or whatever like that. And he goes, your mum, you mean? And JP said, no, Natalie. And he goes, right, fuck you, good luck, and hung up the phone. And immediately, pretty much close after, sent me a text message. She said, I just said goodbye to JP, and now I want to say goodbye. So I guess I'm going to say goodbye to you as well. Would have liked to talk, but that's not going to happen. I always remember it, like I'm reading it and going, you know what, like he's just, you know, broken the father-child relationship through text message.
Through a text message. In one sentence.
In one sentence. In one text message, not even leading into two text messages.
Oh my God.
And but the thing about it was because, and I didn't really realize it so much at the time. I realized, I remember feeling kind of shitty that my father had ended my relationship with a text message. But I felt really free, though, at the other side. I was like, I'm fucking free of this prick. I don't have to deal with his manipulation and bullshit anymore. And I realized that he has ended it. I haven't ended it. Because I knew I could never end it. Because, as we say, to them, it's a game. Mm-hmm. And if I say, we're not going to talk anymore, he's going to just keep fucking firing shit at me until he ends it on his terms. So he had ended it, which meant I actually didn't have to talk to him yet. Now, there's other bits and pieces to the story or whatever like that, and none less so than a half brother that we have, which is Natalie and her father's son, who I did have a relationship up until I was 4 or whatever, and it was around that time when the text message happened that shortly after that was his birthday, and obviously I wanted to get birthday presents to him, but I didn't want to talk to my father or Natalie, which I think is understandable. So I realised that they wouldn't be there on a Sunday because they were mad for show jumping. Just they went down every weekend to the show jumping. So I knew that they wouldn't be there on the Sundays, and his birthday was on the Monday. So I went down on the Sunday and I put the presents very carefully in behind a kind of a side gate, whatever like that. And I left them there. And I says, right, Grant, he'll get the presents anyway. I won't be here to give them to him, but he'll get them. And that's important. He'll know his brothers are still thinking from him. JP was in New York at the time, so we got presents on behalf of both of us as well. So and a card from both of us, so he'd know, his brothers are still thinking of him. So a day or two after that, then I got a knock on the door, and it was my father and Natalie returning the presents, still wrapped and everything else. He said, it basically said to me, "You want a relationship with him, you got to talk to us. You know, he's their possession." You know, so effectively we haven't seen him now for 8 years.
Yeah, history repeats itself.
History repeats itself. Yeah, absolutely. Our older brother, for 5 years, when he got kicked out, or whatever, for 5 years, we weren't allowed to open the door to him and all this kind of shit. He was alienated from it. You know what I mean? Like, our father just keeps on and keeps getting away with it. So that's why we were like, we're going to publish this book, and we're going to at least put it out there.
Yeah, this is what you do. You publish the book. You publish the book. You put it on social media. You come on Hell's for Children, and you expose it for what the fraud that he is.
Exactly, absolutely, and for other people to kind of see, like, that's what I really want the book to spread its wings far and wide, because not just for helping other mothers and stuff, which has been fantastically, from the feedback I'm getting, has really helped. People are coming back. Like, I'm overwhelmed by some of the messages I'm getting, and people are like, oh, I'm seeing the mind of the person who I'm dealing with my kid and stuff like that. So it's already surpassed its expectations on that level, and hopefully it will continue to help people on that level. But as well as that, what I wanted to do, I want people who aren't involved in the kind of this world that we are all kind of in, all those Facebook groups and everything that we're all on. I want the people who aren't in them to see what actually happens, because that's when it'll actually change. That's when the people will actually go, what the fuck is this actually happening? At the moment, I mean, what's horrible, and I see it all the time or whatever, is like...
Yes, you and I know what it's like, because we're in it. But we want the people around the children that are in this to understand, the teachers, the people at church, friends, so they can see the signals and get in there and rescue kids.
There's something very wrong here. I mean, like, I hope you won't mind me saying this, but the truth of the matter is, the person who lives 10 doors up the street from you, say, who you don't really know, right? Probably, if she knows your story or whatever, probably thinks she's probably something wrong with her. There's probably something. That's why.
Yeah. People are very judgmental,
exactly.
And
people just automatically. And you know what? If I just think there's something wrong with her and that's why she doesn't see her kid, then I don't have to do anything about it and I can go live in my fucking happy life.
Right.
Now,
Right.
if people read the book or whatever like that and they sort of say, oh shit, that shit happens. And you see what kids are going through and what kids are to try and stop it and everything else, then you're turning around and you're saying, okay, well, maybe she wasn't crazy. Maybe my mother wasn't crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that
Well, so
woman,
that's one.
maybe that woman down the street isn't crazy, and maybe her kid really needs her, and maybe her kid is going through
Yep.
what me and JP were going through.
Yeah,
and it's like that's what we want.
because it's rampant.
It is
It's
rampant.
rampant. It's an
Absolutely.
epidemic. You know.
And it's. I mean, it's just destroying relationships. It's destroying people. Like it's just trying. Like, you know, obviously. My sympathies are absolutely with the mothers, but I'm trying to take it from the child's angle. And I'm like, my message is like, you know, that this is destroying kids' lives. And it's like, if myself and JP weren't, as I say, of a similar age, I don't know if we'd, because we leaned on each other to an extent, I don't know if we'd be, because then I look at my eldest brother, Seamus, and look, he's happy. And he was up with me here today in the house and the whole lot, and he's grand and everything else, but he can never live a normal life, you know. He can never get a proper job, so to speak. He's got too many psychiatric problems, like, you know, and, you know, my father and Natalie will claim that's nothing to do with them, and that wasn't what they did that caused
Well, they
him.
don't have any conscience, so they can't say anything like that anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that certainly Natalie at some point had a conscience, whether it's eroded away or whatever like that. But she certainly did, and that's why I sometimes kind of hope that she might even read the book and kind of go, well, hang on, why am I doing this to the youngest or half brother, Julian? Because that she might turn around and kind of say, well, look, let's have the rest of his childhood happy. Let's sort of say. But I don't know, you know, sometimes you
It's good to keep your hopes.
Yeah, you keep your hopes, don't you? And you're just like, well, yeah, some chance probably, but anyway.
So you've been, I know that when I came across your story, I was extremely happy that you wrote the book, you and your brother, and I want to express my gratitude to both of you for doing that, because I can have 100 shows and explain what it's like from the mother's end.
Yes.
But we really need to hear what it's like for the children, and there's very little
I know that there's
out there, because you are the first generation really to come out of this nonsense.
Yeah.
Although of course it's been going on for centuries, but to this degree where the mother is completely pushed out, that is the epidemic that we're in. It's a new thing in that sense. So I know you shared with me some links. And what I'll do here is I'll share my screen here for the audience to see, because I know that there's going to be other kids who are still stuck in this, listening to this show, and they might be helped with these types of links, which these are people that dealt with deprivation of the non-abusive parent, and unfortunately they call it parental alienation, which is a term that the mothers are trying to get rid of, because this is what's used against us in court when we
I know that the kind of whole parental alienation syndrome and stuff. It's a weird one, because obviously if basically they will accuse you of anything that they possibly can, I think, in court. But this is a particularly easier one for them to try and hit you with, in that they don't. There doesn't necessarily have to seem to be any proof for you, is there? You know.
Well, what I wanted to show here is that when there are other adults that have gone through what you have gone through, then this is one of the links that they can visit, right? And this guy, and you sent me this, I've seen this guy talk about, he was alienated from,
from his father, yeah.
From his father, if we're going to use the term alienation. I'd like to stick with the term deprived. But it doesn't matter.
We know what we're talking about anyway.
We know what we're talking about. He was deprived from his father, and he ended up putting a whole bunch of videos out there on how to deal with it. And I watched some of them. I thought it was really good, and I
thought they were good.
I love seeing this. I love him sharing that healing journey. You know, that's what's so important.
And what I noticed about his was that it was a different kind of deprivation, so to speak, in that his mother seemed to be quite loving to him. You know, the sort of way who had kind of brainwashed him that his father was a bad person and the whole lot. So it was kind of like child abuse with a hug, you know, the sort of way, like, which is a different kind of thing. So it's just because one of the things I always say to some of the mothers who message me and stuff is just like every situation is different, you know, and there's such sensitive kind of things. Like, so I'm always worried, whatever, like that. There's
also parents. Let's talk about the abusive fathers that will bribe the children, you know, with trips to Disneyland,
absolutely,
clothes, toys, and so they try to play the good guy, and then they'll say that your mom is crazy and your mom's very dangerous. And,
while you're queuing up for some ride in Disneyland or something like that, and you might be like, well, this guy's a great guy, or, you know, so absolutely. And that's the thing is that's kind of a message to get across. Is like each case is different. Well, the people are quite similar.
It's the adult psychology against the very formidable child's brain. So what I wanted to, you know, kind of put out there is for all the children who are watching right now. Let's say you are 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, or even younger or even older, and you're stuck in this. I think the message to take away from your story is to stay really close to your heart and to your feelings and to your gut instinct. Like when you hear something that's not quite right, it probably isn't quite right.
Yes, right? No, definitely. And as I said, I think there definitely was always a part of me that didn't quite believe or whatever like that. And there was times during the earlier years as well where I was tempted to ring like these kind of child helplines or whatever, and out of fear I didn't or whatever like that. But I look back now, I wish I kind of had have done that.
Well, let's talk about that. What what would you say to the children right now, like children like my daughter who are stuck in this? What advice?
I mean, if there is abuse going on, like, I mean, it is, first of all, it is abuse to be kept from another parent. In my opinion, that is child abuse anyway.
Absolutely.
If there is other kinds of things going on or whatever like that, there should be definitely a teacher or some adult that is quite trusting that you can actually confide in. You know, there is kind of lines you can call or whatever like that, but obviously someone who you really know or whatever like that, preferably someone who isn't that close to the person who is abusing you. But, you know, so as I say, a teacher or something like that, what I used to think when I was a kid was if I tell my teacher's going to ring up, think the teacher's going to think they're going to do me a favor by ringing up my father and saying, here, listen, your kid's after saying that you did this, you know, it's probably not true, but blah, blah, blah. And then it's going to get worse. Now, that is not what will happen. That's not what would happen. If you told in confidence, you said to a teacher or someone, it doesn't have to be a teacher, you know, someone like that, in authority or whatever like that, an adult basically that you trust, that, you know, if you said, listen, can I talk to you in confidence? And you told them, I'm pretty sure that they would get in contact with the right people. And I'm pretty sure that if you told them, listen, just make sure that my father can't find out that I'm telling you this, whatever, they will understand.
Here's another way to do it. Yeah. You can also go to an adult that you trust or that you think you trust and first kind of feel it out and say, if you knew a child.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be you.
Talk to their mother.
That's
what would you do, right? What would you do? And if they say, well, I wouldn't get involved because it's none of my business, well, then you know that would not be the right person.
That's a good point. Actually, yeah, a good way of starting is definitely a similar vein to that is I have a friend who might be in this situation.
Right. First
and
start
then
with
when you
that.
get the good reaction, you can turn around and sort of say, okay, that friend is actually me. If you keep getting bad reactions, then you turn around
Exactly.
and say,
If that
okay,
person
I'll go
would
back and
say
tell
like,
that friend. So
yeah, if that person would say, I would totally help that child, and I would
exactly.
take that
Well, look,
child to Child Protective Services and make
yeah,
sure to get connected again. Now,
yeah,
then you could say, hey, it's happening to me. Please help me. And if you
exactly.
tell my father I'm going to be in real trouble, I'm going to get punished, and I
Yeah.
can't have you do
It gets worse
that.
then. Yeah, it gets
It
worse.
gets worse,
The
right?
problem. So, it is important that the adult does understand that, and I think most of them will once you tell them.
Another thing that the children can do, and I'll share my screen here. So if you're a kid and you're watching this and you want to get in touch with your mom, I made a how to contact your mom guide. It's a tutorial on YouTube on my free Jasmine channel here. It's called the Safe and Secure How to Contact Your Mom Guide. And it's about a 10-minute tutorial that will teach you how to make a safe email account that cannot be hacked or tracked. Because what a lot of the abusive fathers will do is they will install spyware on your phone or on your computer and keep track of what you're doing on there. So they're going to look at all the websites that you're looking at. And this little video of 10 minutes, you can play it and stop it and just go in steps, follow me along. It'll show you how to get around all of that. It'll show you how to get around your father spying on you. It'll show you how to make an email account so you can get in touch with your mom. Of course, you need to know the email address of your mom. In my case, my daughter can just go to her website, freejasmine.com, and find it there. But for all the other kids out there, really what you need to do is try to find the email address of your mom, or let's say it's your grandma that you're not allowed to see, or an uncle or an aunt, or you have a right to see the family members that you want to be in touch with. That's your basic human right, and no judge can tell you that you can't do that. As a matter of fact, the United Nations has considered it a form of torture to be kept from your parents or your grandparents or your family. So I hope that helps all the kids.
One thing I would add just on your screen there is to ensure, probably seems obvious, but ensure you're in a school internet or a library internet and not on your phone or on your home, because if it is spyware and they see you going into this YouTube video, they're going to be onto you.
Absolutely. And so here, a very good point there, Brendan. And it says here also, when you go and create this email account that the tutorial is about, it also says, do not try this on your computer or cell phone, because your father might have installed spying software on there, and then he can still get your username and password and go into the email and see what you're doing. You need to do this. So access this YouTube tutorial on a friend's computer or on a friend's cell phone. It's only 12 minutes. Watch it a couple of times until you totally get it, and then go to that friend's house and sneak in an email, and then you and your mom can connect and actually have a normal conversation, because this is the other thing. All this supervised visitation that's going on all over the world in these situations, they're horrible. The mothers and the children are not allowed to have real conversations. These are fake, phony conversations where they can only talk about the weather or school. You can't talk about how you feel or what you really think about it. And it's all that control that the controlling father has is now pushed off advisors.
Then they bring the child home and can say whatever they want and brainwash whatever way they want.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's awful. So, so any other things that you would want to share with the children that you can think of?
No, just, as I say, just don't kind of don't give up. I wouldn't do what I did in the sense that I would try and find that person that can help you, or try and, as Geerte has said there, try and get on a friend's phone or a computer or whatever like that and try and get contact, because it's not something you have to endure, and it's not something that you should be made to endure. And obviously it's a terrible situation to be in. I mean, it's a terrible that you have to kind of do these sneaky ways to try and speak to,
it's empowering too. I mean, I think what's really important for the children to realize is that you cannot get your childhood back, and you need to fight for the right to have to not lose it by getting back in touch with your mother. And screw the father, fuck him. Sorry about my language, but what they're doing is torture, and you just need to find a safe way to get in touch with your mom and have normal conversations. And
like in our situation, it was 18 years before we saw our mother, from the age of 10 to 28. Obviously it's great that we have our mother back in our lives and everything else, but the one regret I always will have is that those 18 years are lost. And a lot of those are important years, your childhood, where you need your mother, and it's conversations I have with my mother now are about present day things usually, and occasionally it'd be like, sure, do you remember when, and I have to stop, because we didn't have a relationship then, so we can't talk about that. So if you're a child out there, whatever like that's, you can never mend that, you can never get those years back or whatever like that. So,
don't wait. Don't wait.
Oh, a
get
year
in touch with your mom right away.
Will be okay, but 18 years, it's something you never get back,
Now, when I put the announcement out for the show on Facebook and social media, a lot of the moms contacted me. They were very excited that you were going to be on, and one of the main questions I heard from all of them was like, why did it take you so long to get in touch with her, to be reunited with her, and what was that like? Can you share that?
Yeah, well, as I said, we were probably 23, or I was about 23 or something when I really figured out that my father was kind of, this was around the divorce case where I was like, okay, this guy's not a great guy. And it takes a few years then to figure out what happened, if that makes sense. You've been fed so many lies over the years, or whatever like that if, one or two of the lies might seem kind of, okay, well, that was a bad thing. Well, if we let him away with that, and we let him away with that, everybody does the odd bad thing. That's grand, whatever like that. But it's only when you actually go through the entire amount of it, really, that you kind of realize, well, actually what he did was, as I said, alienate, completely deprive us, as you say, of our mother for those years. And why he did it, because he claimed to have done it for our own benefit. So we spent a couple of years thinking that he thought that he'd done it for our benefit, but it wasn't really for our benefit. It took a couple
so
of
you're
years.
Still, it takes a couple of years to process what has happened.
And these are a couple of years as an adult, like, with an adult brain. So you've had it, like, as a child, kind of trying to ignore it or trying to, just get on with things, whatever like that. And then you're an adult and you're thinking, well, as I say, the first thing was, okay, I don't think this guy is the great guy that he's making himself out to be, because he did make himself out to be. And like, he like, as soon as we hit 18, it was like, when are you going to pay me back for all the things I saved you from that horrible woman and all? And
my Lord!
And got you this other mother who's brilliant. And look at how well you turned out because of what a great mother I got for you as I replaced that other old bitch. Like, so you've been fed this for a long time, and you're kind of going, when it's put in like, look at how well you turned out, that's kind of a compliment. And it's like, it's down to these reasons. And then you're kind of
right.
Like, you're on the kind of credit for
it. They take credit for it.
Like,
instead of the fact that you turned out the way you be, despite.
It's right, exactly. I know, absolutely. It's right, exactly. But it's, these guys are experts at like pointing out one thing. Like, if I could go back when he said that to me the first time, I turn around and go, and what a great job he did with Seamus as well. He's stuck in psychiatric care, but of course he'd say, well, that's none of my fault, because
I had this other mother whose child is completely derailed at age 15 on drugs and alcohol and promiscuous behavior, and the father is now blaming the mother for the derailment.
Doesn't
I mean,
surprise
it's
me at all.
never their fault, right?
No,
It's never their fault.
no, and not
It's
even
either
not
the
even
child's fault or the mother's fault.
yeah, not even just never their fault, but they will tell you who it is to blame for it. Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it's the same with Seamus. Seamus is in psychiatric care, according to my father, because he lived with our mother for 15 years. So he had a lot longer time for her to mess him up, so to speak. Now, he was a completely happy child up until 15. And then he went fucking, because everything, his world was turned upside down,
Awful.
Yeah. So
Let's spin the phone number on the live broadcast and take some live callers if people want to call in. I know there were so many moms wondering what you were going to share, because obviously as protective mothers around the world, we're wondering what this is like for our children. A lot of the children, when they get in touch with the mothers, the children are angry. I think from what I'm taking away from your story has been really eye-opening in understanding now, like, okay, so if you act happy or you want to hug your mother, that's going to mean that there are going to be repercussions.
Exactly.
I'm starting to get it now,
Yeah, I mean, like, at the end of the day, like those times when you are that child, that 10-year-old child, whatever, and you have a choice, okay, if I hug my mother, but particularly when it's visitations like that, it's like, at the end of the day, the house that you're going home to sleep in, it's the roof over you, because once the door is closed, you're enclosed in that house with that person or whatever like that. So it's like, even though it feels bad to not hug your mother or everything else, you have to go home and live in that, he could do anything to me. That's the way you feel. So it's out of pure fear.
It's fear.
You go and you do that. I mean, as I say, each case is kind of different, but certainly initially it will be fear. I think from speaking to a lot of mothers already on messages, a lot of the time it is fear, almost of, what will be done to them. But there's fear. There's also the guilt trip one as well. That's an old favorite of theirs as well. It's like, I mean, a simple thing like that. Like, you could say, look, I'm the one has a roof over your head. I'm the one who gives you your dinner, and so you're upsetting me when you go and you give her a hug or you say you love her or something like that. And
I do have to vacuum clean the house for that, though.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, well, I did. No. That wasn't for me, unfortunately.
For all the international children who are watching, let's talk about that for a second, because they have the hardest time. They cannot take the bus back to mom or run away to mom. Go to the consulate. If you have double citizenship, go to the consulate in the country that you're stuck in. Let's say, for example, my daughter, she can go to the Dutch consulate in San Francisco and refuse to leave. Because she has Dutch citizenship, so as soon as she sets foot on the grounds of the Dutch consulate, she's on Dutch soil, and she can say, this is what's happening. I'm 12 years old and I am refusing to leave my country, which is the Netherlands. And the United States has not taken care of me. And if they say, look, we'll call Child Protective Services, you refuse. You say, no, I want to talk to Child Protective Services in the Netherlands, not the American. The Americans have not taken care of me. I live in fear and terror. I do not want this anymore, and I refuse to leave. Like Julian Assange, you just get to the consulate and don't leave.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's an interesting situation, all right. But yeah, you're right. I mean, and that's a thing that probably say your daughter mightn't understand, unless you tell her. And even still, she might be kind of going, "Is that definite? Like, definitely? What if I'm caught on the way to the consulate? Like, she might be worried about the repercussions. Once you get in a taxi and you're gone, I think you're gone. Like,
I think what's important is not to be too worried about the repercussions, because the
Yeah,
repercussions can also be reasons for other adults to get involved and say, hey,
it's
what's
true. I
wrong?
know it is true. It's easy for us to sit here and say that. It's not as easy for
Absolutely.
the child who's going, yeah, but I'm the one who, as I say, behind those closed doors, stuff is happening to me that you don't
Well,
know, and
this is
I
why
don't want to deal with that. That's what the kid is saying,
this is why it's so important to have you on, because for us, we can cook up 100 scenarios in our
Yeah,
heads of what we would do, but we don't know what
I
it's
know.
like.
And
And that's why,
that's why I'm saying, like, from a child's point of view, I know that was me. I'd be sitting there and I'd be going, okay, that all sounds wonderful, but I can see a million ways how I wouldn't get from A to B without him catching me, or the taxi man turning around and saying to me, oh, listen, I think you're a bit young to be getting a taxi. I'll bring you back into your father, and him
yeah,
going, you know what I mean? All these different scenarios that could
uh,
basically obstruct this from happening and make things even worse for the kid, because they have defied their father's orders and done the most horrendous crime that you can do to one of these fathers is try to see your mother. They will make you know that, you could go out and you could fucking murder someone, and that would be grand compared to going back and trying to get in contact with your mother. That is the most heinous crime you could ever commit to these people. That's the way they'll have you feel. So, or anything that kind of looks like you're doing that or whatever. So it will instill an amazing amount of fear in a child, in that they will be thinking, that all sounds brilliant on paper, but what if something goes wrong? Things go horribly bad for me then, and I have to deal with the repercussions.
yeah, that's the
Um,
truth. We don't know what those repercussions are. I
you
know
don't.
she told me she used to get locked up in the closet for extended periods of time,
Yeah,
and that kind of stuff. So we don't want that. Of course,
no,
I'm
no.
just
I mean,
putting
we're
it
not
out
saying
there as
that.
an idea. Yeah,
Absolutely. And what I would say, even to anyone who was doing it as a child, I would say you still should do it, like, and try and be the hero and do that, whatever, like that. I'm just sort of saying that I can also see the child's point of view, that I'm sort of saying I can see why you wouldn't do
absolutely.
it. And
Yeah,
nobody
absolutely.
blames you if you wouldn't do it, because, that's another thing, is like, a child might worry, is like, is my mother going to give out to me then because I didn't speak to her for 2 years, or because I didn't, and it's like, the guilt and everything else, or whatever, like that, so I
Well,
think a child needs to,
Jasmine, if you're watching, I would never hold it against you, because I know
exactly, I
there's
think
nothing
every
you can do
child
about
should
it.
know
Yeah.
that, like, that, they haven't done, they've done nothing wrong. It's adults that have done something wrong to them.
Yeah, that's right. All I did was try and protect her from exactly this, that
Yeah,
what she's in
absolutely.
right now.
Yeah.
We both knew it was coming, and we tried to prevent it. So
Yeah.
at least she knows I tried everything, and I'm still trying everything.
Yeah.
I'll never stop. And I do suggest that all the children try and find their moms on social media.
Yeah.
I know a lot of the fathers will block the children from the Facebook page from their moms, but go on another account, go on your friend's account,
Definitely.
or make up another account and go look for your mom on Facebook, because a lot of the protective mothers are putting out messages on their Facebook page for their children in hopes that they find it.
Yeah.
So please do that. And if you can just give a sign of life, if you can send a Facebook message saying, hey mom, I'm here and I know you're out there and I'm watching and I'm reading what you're writing, then that would be wonderful, because a lot of the mothers don't know if their children are still alive or where they are,
Yeah,
what's
or what's
going
happening with them. Absolutely.
on.
Again,
So
it's a hard thing for a child to probably do that, but it's definitely a lot easier in this day and age with technology that's out there. And kids are probably even smarter than us at some of the technology and the ways around it. Whatever. I would say, to a child, like, try and find that way around it and try and get in contact with that parent that you miss or whatever, because look, it could be the first contact could lead to a conversation that leads to a way of solving the problem as well. It's certainly going to be
well,
easier to solve
I
if
think I think this book, the book that you wrote, should be mandatory reading material in schools, and there should be discussions in schools, both primary schools and high school, middle school and high school, as to who might be experiencing this in class, or maybe not even that, but maybe do a hypothetical conversation as teacher with your students as to that it's not okay to be held from another parent, and that if you are dealing with it, to get this book and then to have this book available in class, in schools, so children can read it and learn that this is not okay. These are crimes against humanity. What's happening to you is unlawful, it's criminal, it is considered by the United Nations a form of torture. You should never put up with it. You should try and find a trusted adult who can help you and be your voice and take you to Child Protective Services and make sure that you are not returned to that parent, because it is absolutely cruel, and you have a right to your childhood, and fight for it. So
that's the thing, and when you say to talk to an adult and everything else, like, you're fed so many times that your parents are the two most authoritative people that you have to kind of. So there is a party as a child that kind of goes, well, if you're being subjected to that you sort of say, well, this is, say, my father, so it mustn't be a crime, or it mustn't be, or somehow I deserve this, or, sort of like. So it's definitely really important for kids to see that it's not that, it isn't that way. And just because he's your father or, whatever, that doesn't mean that somebody who is a teacher or whatever that has less authority to help you, if that kind of makes sense. It's like, don't think, well, the book stops with him kind of thing. He's in control of my care and everything else, and he's subjecting me to this, so I just have to put up with it, because that's not the case at all. You should never have to put up with it. So
another thing you can do is just go and tell everybody that you miss your mom.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what can your father do about that? If you go and say that to the neighbors, to your friends, to their parents, to the teacher, to the, everyone around you, I miss my mom. I miss my mom. I miss my mom. I miss my mom.
If you can. Absolutely. Again, it goes back to, if I had done that when I was 10 or whatever like that, I would have got the shit kicked out of me. So, there's probably a lot of kids that probably won't want to do that because of that reason. I mean, if anything, if someone asked me, do you miss your mom when I was a kid, I would have turned around and said, oh no, she's a terrible mother and she abandoned me, because that's what I knew that I was told to say. And if I said anything other than that, I would be, physically or some way punished, you know what I mean? So,
but now we know that if the children are watching this, that they can say, I am told to tell everyone that my mother abandoned me, but I don't believe it and I miss her.
Yeah.
Because that really is the truth. And if you stay with the truth, if you truly stay with the truth, then it will come back to you in good ways, because people will start to understand what's going on.
That's the thing. And as you speak about the truth, and I mean, for everybody, the truth really only hurts liars. The truth never hurts. The reason you'd be punished for it or anything like that is because basically that's hurting a liar. That's the reason.
That's right. So here's your website, hugyourmother.wordpress.com, and on the homepage, if you scroll down, you can find the Amazon links to the book. There's, of course, you can buy it in Europe and UK and USA. There are different Amazon links. Please buy this book. If you're a teacher and you're watching this, please buy it in bulk and start distributing this in schools, in extracurricular activity locations, as well as courthouses. I am going to suggest we buy this book by the thousands and start sending it to attorneys, to judges, to evaluators, to we need to massively protest about the fact that judicial child trafficking is happening, and that we are absolutely here to change that once and for all. Brenna, I'm so happy that you came on the show today and shared your story.
Thanks for having me on.
Truly one of the most important interviews I've done, and I've done about almost 40 of them. The child's perspective to me is the most important. I'm of course a protective mother in the other end of it, but what you're going through is what's going through my mind all the time. Like, what is this like for Jasmine? And I think a lot of the viewers will be enormously helped, because, for example, mothers will come to me and say, my child is so angry at me. We now have the answer. We now understand why they're angry.
You can help the child to figure that out. Don't force it on them, but you can help them. You just with facts, with the truth again, you know what I mean? A good way of kind of doing things, what we found when we were writing the memoir, where we ended up kind of figuring everything out, was putting everything in chronological order, you know, because everything kind of sort of starts to make sense when you know what happened from the start to the end, you know, and each event happens in between or whatever like that. So if you have a child that's kind of angry or whatever like that at you or whatever like that, if you can try and put out the facts to them in chronological order and just tell the story again, like as I say, with a memoir we wrote, we didn't say, here's an episode that happened and the reason this happened is because our father's an asshole. We let the reader make up their minds on who's the bad guy and who's the good guy. We just tell what happens. And that's what you need to do.
What I think we need to do to finish it off, because we have a few seconds left. And
okay, no problem,
What I wanted to end with is that I suggest that you and I keep brainstorming on how to get support groups out there for children who are still in hostage situations, so they can communicate in safe ways, so we can help them get out, and to create more of these support systems for adult survivors of maternal deprivation, and to go into schools together and explain what this is like, to go to World Congress in Dublin next year in June, about family law. I've been invited to go there to represent protective mothers, so we could meet there and you know, hand out flyers to people, stuff like that. You know, there's lots we can do. I think we should band together and be a force, mothers and children, against abusive fathers, you know, and the judicial system that supports them, because this must end. This torture that you have gone through, and JP, I am so sorry for the both of you. I wish I could.
It's all in the past, and as far as myself and JP are concerned, it stays in the past. And what we want to do now is use the kind of the bad experience that we've had to try and have some positive change for the future. But it doesn't happen doesn't have to happen to other kids.
I just wish I could make it different for you, because it's an awful story, but what you've done is make lemonade out of lemons, and you're here just in this interview with me to, you've helped a lot of people, I know it. So you've helped me today. Thank you so much. I really super appreciate it.
I do get messages and stuff like that from mothers and asking for advice or whatever like that, and I'm absolutely fine with that on Facebook or on Gmail or whatever. But if I don't answer straight away, I'm not ignoring you. I will answer after.
Thank you.
It's actually so many.
I know it gets overwhelming. There's so many. There's thousands of us. So
unfortunately, there's so many. That's the problem. So there you go.
Thank you so much.
Okay, no problem.
Maybe in the future we'll have you on again if you want. Sure. I'd greatly appreciate it. We can do a show with people calling in, because we were
we'll get it together. I feel like we could have sat here and chatted all night, to be honest, anyway. So
you know what? You could even start your own program on CCN. Seriously.
We'll see.
All right. Thank you, Brandon.
Thanks a million,
And
Geerte.
please thank your brother for me.
I will,
as
of course.
well.
Yeah, no, I will, of course, definitely.
And please give your mom a hug for me.
I will, of course. That's why we named the website
Right.
Hug Your Mother.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. And this was another episode of Hell's for Children, and I hope you join me again next week. Bye, everybody.
If we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Mainstream media exists for the purposes of indoctrination and manipulation of public perception. The world of free and independent media is growing, and with the upsurge in information now available in the public domain, it has never been easier to access free and independent media.